एवरीवन गुड इवनिंग वंस अगेन। आज लाइव स्ट्रीम एक्चुअली थोड़ा सा स्टॉप रह गई मिडल ऑफ द लेवल। नाउ इफ यू लुक एट द लेवल, मैंने मॉर्निंग पे बता दिए थे सेम ही लेवल है, नथिंग चेंज टिल नाउ। यू कैन सी ओवर हियर क्रूड ऑयल पे मॉर्निंग पे मैंने बताया था यहाँ पर एक पॉइंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट है। वहाँ पर काफ़ी देर तक रुका रहा प्राइस, देन वहाँ से फिर एक सेलिंग आई थी, फाइनली वो नीचे वाले सपोर्ट पे पहुँच गया। सो पॉइंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट है, जो एक सेलिंग का ट्रेड लगाया था वो एक मोमेंटम दिया है। नेचुरल गैस की बात करें तो मॉर्निंग पे की बाइंग का ट्रेड यहाँ पे लगाया था। बाय द वे, नेचुरल गैस का करंट फ्यूचर का चार्ट नहीं है, नेक्स्ट मंथ का फ्यूचर का चार्ट है। बिकॉज करंट मंथ की ऑप्शन की एक्सपायरी ऑलरेडी हो चुकी है। सो उस वजह से जो अभी हम यूज़ कर रहे हैं ऑप्शन नेक्स्ट मंथ का ही कर रहे हैं, तो मैंने नेक्स्ट मंथ का ही फ्यूचर लगाया हुआ है। ठीक है। तो कंफ्यूज मत करना है फ्यूचर में प्राइस क्यों अलग चल रहा है। तो मॉर्निंग पे एक ट्रेड लगाया था, थोड़ा बहुत ऊपर आया, फिर नीचे आया, फिर वहां से एक बाइंग आई, फिर ऊपर गया, एग्जैक्टली लेवल को हिट नहीं किया। कल भी इसी लेवल से मुड़ गया था, मैंने पहले बताया था ऊपर से यहाँ से भी एक सेलिंग कर सकते हैं, बट कल ये क्योंकि ऑलरेडी एक सेलिंग दे चुका है तो ज़्यादा क्वांटिटी रखना मत। तो यहाँ से अगर सेलिंग प्लान कर रहे हो थोड़ी कम ही क्वांटिटी में करना, जो लोग बाइंग में थे वो लोग निकल जाना। बाकी ये ऊपर वाला जो लेवल है सबसे स्ट्रॉन्ग मान सकते हो ओवर हियर। ठीक है। तो ये मॉर्निंग पे लेवल थे, ये दूसरी लाइव है। मॉर्निंग वाली लाइव में मैंने मॉर्निंग पे लेवल बता दिया, सुबह 10 बजे लाइव किया था, फिर वो थोड़ा सा डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया था एंड देन मैं वो लाइव कंटिन्यू नहीं कर पाया बिकॉज ऑफ सम रीजन। कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो कमेंट बॉक्स में पूछ सकते हो आप लोग भी। लास्ट ट्रेडिंग सेशन है, ज़्यादा रिस्क मत लेना अगर नहीं ले पाए हो ट्रेड। ठीक है। मॉर्निंग से दो ही ट्रेड मिले हैं ओवरऑल अगर चेक किया जाए तो। व्हेन विल यू स्ट्रीम? सर स्ट्रीम तो लाइव ही है सर, स्ट्रीम इज़ लाइव। मैंने मॉर्निंग पे लाइव किया था, वो फिर ड्यू टू सम रीजंस वो कंटिन्यू नहीं कर पाया मैं उस समय, इसलिए दूसरा लाइव है। कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो कमेंट बॉक्स में जरूर पूछ सकते हैं। ठीक है। वैसे मुझे लगता नहीं कोई ट्रेड यहाँ पर बनने की पॉसिबिलिटी ज़्यादा रहेगी अब आज के दिन। फिर भी एक देख लेते हैं, अगर कोई एक और ट्रेड अगर यहाँ पर यू नो बन जाता है तो। बाकी एक डेटा था ड्यूरेबल गुड्स का और को ड्यूरेबल गुड्स का, वो डेटा भी आ चुका है। दैट डेटा इज पॉजिटिव फॉर डॉलर, नेगेटिव फॉर गोल्ड एंड सिल्वर, और आप कोई डेटा नहीं है। नेक्स्ट वीक को अगर मैं देखूँ, ये वीक तो निकल चुका है ऑलरेडी। इफ यू लुक एट द नेक्स्ट वीक, सो नेक्स्ट वीक भी आपका मंडे को तो कोई डेटा नहीं है, ट्यूसडे को आपका जॉब ओपनिंग का डेटा है, एडीपी नॉन फार्म। हाँ, इस दिन वेनेसडे के दिन यूएस का एडवांस जीडीपी का डेटा भी है, वो ध्यान रखना। और एफओएमसी का रेट कट का डिसीजन भी आने वाला है। ये इंपॉर्टेंट रहेगा कि रेट कट करता है नहीं करते हैं एफओएमसी वाले, फेड रेट करेगा नहीं करेगा। देन फिर आपका क्रूड ऑयल नेचुरल गैस की इन्वेंट्री वगैरह नॉर्मल डेटा है उसके बाद। तो इंपॉर्टेंट डेटा है नेक्स्ट वीक वेनेसडे को, ध्यान रखना, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डेटा है वेनेसडे को। हाँ, वेनेसडे को, और फिर वेनेसडे की रात को, मतलब इंडियन मार्केट को अगले दिन इम्पैक्ट करेगा। सिंपल सी बात है। इसको चेंज कर देते हैं। बाकी नेचुरल गैस नेक्स्ट मंथ का है ये चार्ट आपके सामने। ठीक है। मैंने कल ही बताया था, कल नीचे सपोर्ट बहुत स्ट्रांग बन चुका है, इतना आसान नहीं होगा इसको ब्रेक करना अब। कल भी मैंने आप लोगों को बताया हुआ था, तो वही कंटिन्यू कर रहा है मार्केट अभी भी। बाकी इस वीक तो जा चुका है। नेक्स्ट वीक की अगर मैं बात करूं तो नेक्स्ट वीक, नेक्स्ट 2 वीक्स मोस्ट प्रोबेबली मैं कंटिन्यू लाइव नहीं कर पाऊंगा। कंटिन्यू क्या, मैं लाइव शायद थोड़ा ना कर पाऊँ। तो हो सकता है कोई लाइव स्ट्रीम ना रहे अगले 1 से 2 वीक्स के लिए, स्पेशली इन अगस्त, बट इन जुलाई एज वेल। कल तो सैटरडे संडे है, 26 27 मार्केट वैसे भी क्लोज रहता है। 28 को मंडे है, तो लेट्स सी मंडे को लाइव कर पाते हैं नहीं कर पाते। नहीं तो 29 और 30 को शायद पॉसिबिलिटी है लाइव करेंगे। 31 को भी शायद पॉसिबिलिटी नहीं है कि लाइव नहीं कर पाऊंगा, तो ध्यान रखना। फिर पॉसिबल रहेगा तो फर्स्ट को लाइव करेंगे, सेकंड और थर्ड को ऐसे भी मार्केट क्लोज है, सैटरडे संडे। फिर जो नेक्स्ट वीक आने वाला है 4 to एटलीस्ट 9, 9 को रक्षाबंधन भी है तो 4 to 8 कह सकते हो, वहां पर लाइव मैं नहीं रहूंगा। देयर इज 90% चांसेस, तो ध्यान रखना नेक्स्ट वीक मे बी आई एम नॉट अवेलेबल ऑन लाइव स्ट्रीम। लेट्स सी क्रूड ऑयल क्या और सेल ऑफ दिखाता है। कल वैसे यहाँ से बाइंग ऑलरेडी आ चुकी है बट अभी भी यहाँ पर रुका है थोड़ा बहुत। लेट्स सी कितना और मूव करता है। लाइक भी करते रहो गाइस जिन लोगों ने लाइक नहीं किया स्ट्रीम को। ये क्रूड में देखते हैं कुछ पॉसिबिलिटी अगर यहाँ पर रहती है 15 मिनट टाइम फ्रेम पर। थोड़ा सा और नीचे आ जाता है क्योंकि कल यहाँ पर भी सपोर्ट ले चुका है 2 बार। एक अर्ली मॉर्निंग इसको भी काउंट करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि फॉरेक्स में यहाँ पर ऑलरेडी बाइंग आ चुकी थी। हमारा मार्केट ही गैप अप ओपन हुआ था। सो लेट्स सी कहाँ पर है ये। कि कल यहाँ पर ये बाइंग ऑलरेडी दिखा चुका है, ये देख पा रहे होगे। फॉरेक्स में है यहाँ पर बाइंग, एमसीएक्स में भी गैप अप हुआ है तो बाइंग है। यहाँ पर ये कह सकते हो आप सेकंड टाइम। हाँ सेकंड टाइम आया है, कैंडल तो नॉर्मली है, कैंडल नॉर्मली है। एक बार बाइंग यहाँ से आई है, हाई बना है। थर्ड टाइम आ रही है बाइंग यहाँ से, एक ट्राई इसके नीचे सपोर्ट। इसके नीचे तो फिर काफी लो लेवल पर है। ठीक है यहाँ पर सपोर्ट है ये क्रूड ऑयल में, दूसरी बार ही आ रहा है। एंड इसके नीचे अगर देखें तो फिर काफी लो लेवल पर है सपोर्ट एक्चुअली। कि थोड़ा नीचे वाले अगर सपोर्ट पे आ जाता ना तो बढ़िया था। वहां पर अभी तक टेस्ट एक ही बार हुआ है, एक यहाँ पर, दूसरा दूसरी बार कहाँ पर हुआ है। इस एरिया के आसपास अगर मिल जाए ये हमें, क्योंकि यहाँ पर 2 बार ही टेस्ट हुआ है, एक बार और पेंडिंग है यहाँ पर टेस्ट होना प्राइस के लिए। तो थोड़ा अगर गिर जाता, क्योंकि यहाँ पर ऑलरेडी बाइंग आ चुकी है ना यहाँ पर। एक बार यहाँ कल आ गई थी, कल हमारे इंडियन मार्केट में जब हमारा क्लोज था। दूसरी ये फॉरेक्स में आ गई थी, एमसीएक्स में भी आ गई है। तो ये थर्ड टाइम है एक्चुअली में। तो मैं एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा हूँ कि यहाँ पर अभी तक और डीप लेवल पे बाइंग हुई नहीं है, तो यहाँ से अगर बाइंग आ जाए तो वो बढ़िया है। क्योंकि ये लेवल एग्जॉस्ट हो गया होगा, थर्ड टाइम है तो थोड़ा तो वीक हो ही गया होगा, ऐसा तो नहीं है कि बिल्कुल भी वीक नहीं हुआ होगा। फर्स्ट टाइम भी आता तो कुछ कंसिडर कर सकते थे, सेकंड टाइम भी ठीक है, थोड़ा बहुत हो जाता है, थर्ड टाइम है। सो एज पर माई पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू थोड़ा अगर नीचे और आए 5585 वहाँ पर एक बाइंग मैं एक्सपेक्ट करता हूँ, हो सकती है ज़्यादा बेटर एज कम्पेयर टू दिस लेवल, करंट लेवल। इवन दो ये अभी भी सपोर्ट है, ब्रेक नहीं हुआ है, ध्यान रखना, ठीक है। जब तक कैंडल क्लोज नहीं होती 15 मिनट की, दो कंजिक्यूटिवली 5657। एक कैंडल ओपन इक्वल टू हाई है क्रूड ऑयल में, अभी भी ब्रेक नहीं हुआ है सपोर्ट क्रूड का। लेट्स सी ब्रेक हो जाए तो बेटर ही है। और अगर नहीं भी होता है ना, इन केस मान लो ये ब्रेक नहीं होता है और ये थर्ड टाइम भी रुक जाता है, तो वापस ऊपर आने पर हम वापस सेल कर देंगे, ठीक है, 5730 740 इस एरिया के आसपास, अगर ये होल्ड नहीं किया। वैसे तो इसको मेरे अकॉर्डिंग यहाँ पर एक ही चीज़ फेवर में है, आने को तीसरे बार सपोर्ट में है, एक बार बाइंग आई है, दूसरी बार हायर हाई बनाया, तो थर्ड टाइम चलो एक ट्राई कर ही लेते हैं। अगर ये कैंडल अपना वापस ओपन इक्वल टू हाई ब्रेक कर दे, तब इसमें एक छोटे से एसएल के साथ एंट्री करेंगे, ठीक है। इसमें मत करना, कैंडल ओपन इक्वल टू हाई है तो थोड़ा सा वेट होना जरूरी है। हाँ, हो गया ना, ठीक है। तो ये एक ट्रेड ज़्यादा बड़ा एसएल मत रखना, फ़ायदा नहीं है। वीक हो चुका है सपोर्ट थोड़ा बहुत, तो थोड़ा तो वीक डेफिनेटली है, बट एक लास्ट टाइम अगर थोड़ा पुल बैक दे दे और फिर गिरे तो बढ़िया। बाकी इसमें एसएल जा सकता है, वैसे चांसेस इज वेरी हाई इन क्रूड ऑयल बाइंग ट्रेड, सो गो विद अ स्मॉल क्वांटिटी। मैं तो ये एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा हूँ कि ये गिर के नीचे यहाँ आ जाए तो यहाँ बाइंग डायरेक्टली ज़्यादा बेटर है, या फिर ऊपर जाने पे यहाँ सेलिंग ज़्यादा बेटर है। ये दो ट्रेड ज़्यादा फेवरेबल है अभी, नीचे बाइंग या तो 5000 580 560 पर, या फिर 5740 730 के आसपास सेलिंग, दोज ट्रेड्स आर मोर फेवरेबल एज कम्पेयर टू दिस बाइंग ट्रेड। तो थोड़ा सा इसमें क्वांटिटी कम ही रखना, इवन दो एसएल मैंने छोटा ही रखा हुआ है 20 पॉइंट का ये फ्यूचर में, बट स्टिल ज़्यादा बड़ा रिस्क मत उठाना, ठीक है। बाकी यहाँ पर आता है तो यहाँ से क्योंकि इतना टाइम है भी नहीं, 9:30 ऑलरेडी हो चुका है, 11:30 पे मार्केट हो जाता है क्लोज। सो 2 घंटे हैं, 2 घंटे में टोटल 15 मिनट की 8 ही कैंडल बनेंगी, 8 कैंडल। तो उस 8 कैंडल में प्राइस पहले यहाँ आ जाए, फिर यहाँ से बाइंग करे, या फिर यहाँ आ जाए, यहाँ से कोई बड़ी सेलिंग दे, इन दोनों ट्रेड, मतलब यहाँ पर पॉसिबिलिटी तो है ट्रेड बनने की, बट उन ट्रेड के चलने की पॉसिबिलिटी की अभी जाएगा, चांसेस कम हो जाते हैं। तो सबसे एक प्रॉपर जहाँ पर मोमेंटम आने के चांसेस हैं वो यही लेवल हो सकता है। बट गो विद अ स्मॉल क्वांटिटी, ठीक है, बड़ी क्वांटिटी में मत जाना, नहीं तो फंस सकते हो। बाकी एक बार नेचुरल गैस का भी देख लेते हैं चार्ट, ये नेक्स्ट मंथ का फ्यूचर चार्ट है। कल का ध्यान रखना, ट्रेड का थोड़ा सा रिस्की साइड पे है तो ज़्यादा क्वांटिटी लेना मत। ICMR study found COVID vaccination didn't raise risk of unexplained sudden death among young adults. JP Nadda. कि नेचुरल गैस में देखो, ये भी अगर थोड़ा सा और ऊपर अगर आ जाए टू 84 या 86 के आसपास, या फिर इस लेवल पे भी आता है, चलो 280, यहाँ पर भी एक कंसिडर किया जा सकता है अनटिल अनलेस कैंडल ओपन इक्वल टू लो ना बने। So need to see this level in natural gas. कल का ध्यान रखना। अभी इस ट्रेड के अलावा और ट्रेड कोई पॉसिबल बनने की पॉसिबिलिटी कम ही है, थोड़ा रिस्की ट्रेड है। मोस्ट सबसे अच्छे ट्रेड तो दो यहीं पर बन सकते हैं, इस 5000 580 560 के अराउंड बाइंग, या फिर 5000 750 730 के अराउंड सेलिंग। दीज टू ट्रेड्स आर मोस्ट फेवरेबल। बट वहां तक प्राइस आके फिर मूव करेगा, चांसेस आर वेरी लेस, मार्केट क्लोजिंग टाइम पर है। तो एक मोस्ट जो ट्रेड मूव कर सकता है, दैट इज द ओनली वन, दिस वन, बट इट इज रिस्की, सो गो विद अ स्मॉल क्वांटिटी। बाकी इन दो लेवल का वेट करोगे तो बेटर रहेगा, ये पहला और ये दूसरा, बाइंग और सेलिंग के लिए। बट याद रखना, यहाँ तक अगर आ भी गया इन दो लेवल तक, फिर वहां पर आने के बाद मूव होने के चांसेस बहुत कम है अभी, क्योंकि तब तक मार्केट मोस्टली क्लोज ही होगा, क्लोज हो चुका होगा। बस ऐसा रखा, ज़्यादा बड़ी क्वांटिटी मत रखना, एसएल जाएगा तो निकलना भी है।
Hi, I'm Lisa Mateo, introducing you to the new Stock Movers Report from Bloomberg. These are short audio reports, 5 minutes or less, delivered right to your podcast feed throughout the day. Stock Movers fills you in on the day's winners and losers on Wall Street and tells you about the news and data that's driving those gains and losses. If you want to stay plugged into the stock market but don't want to spend all day watching tickers scroll across your screen, then Stock Movers is a place for you to get informed. Listen a couple times throughout the day to find out what's moving equities and why. Search for Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen. Get the latest stock news and data backed by reporting from Bloomberg's 3,000 journalists and analysts across the globe. Subscribe to Stock Movers wherever you get your podcasts.
News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nathan Hager. President Donald Trump is headed to Scotland with a message he says he's getting from Fed Chair Powell.
The country is doing well.
The president spoke to reporters at the White House a day after touring the Fed's building renovation.
I got that to mean that I think he's going to start recommending lower rates.
And we get more from Bloomberg's Mike Shepard in Washington.
He didn't indicate whether that would come at the meeting next week. Most analysts and experts are expecting the Fed to hold steady next week when the Federal Open Market Committee meets that set interest rate policy. But perhaps by the end of the year, we would see some movement in a direction that would favor what the president has want, but perhaps more on the Fed's own terms, too.
Bloomberg's Mike Shepard in the nation's capital. This evening, the president says he will meet with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at one of his Scottish Gulf properties. He says they could hammer out more of the details of their recent trade framework. As for the odds of a trade deal with the European Union before the August 1st deadline,
We have a 50-50 chance, maybe less than that, but a 50-50 chance of making a deal with the EU.
President Trump threatened the bloc with a 30% tariff rate earlier this month. EU negotiators are hoping to get that down to 15%. The president is also downplaying the chance for a new trade deal with Canada, saying he might leave existing import taxes on that country in place. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick met this week with Canada's U.S. Trade Minister, but the president says Canada talks are not a focus for his administration. President Trump also says a potential pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell is not a focus, though he says it is his right.
It's something I haven't thought about. It's really something. I'm allowed to do it, but it's something I have not thought about.
President Trump spoke as the jailed accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein meets for a second day with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. House Oversight Chairman James Comer has said a pardon for the jailed sex offender should be off the table, that any offer could lead her to mislead investigators. Deportation flights have begun from Florida's so-called Alligator Alcatraz. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the Department of Homeland Security has removed more than 100 detainees from the detention center in the remote Everglades so far. Officials say there have been about 2 or 3 flights. They're not saying where they went. DeSantis says those numbers will go up dramatically. Critics have condemned the facility as cruel and inhumane. Cornell University may be next to get a deal with the Trump administration to restore its federal research funding. Sources tell Bloomberg News the Ivy League school is likely to be one of the next to settle anti-Semitism claims after Columbia University's sweeping deal with the White House this week. On Wall Street, stocks are once again poised for record highs at the end of a busy earnings week. Right now, the S&P 500 is higher by almost 0.3%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 0.2%, and the Nasdaq Composite is higher by 0.3%. The S&P has gone up every day this week, setting off a revival of meme stock mania. Though this morning, those names such as Kohl's, Krispy Kreme, and GoPro are quieter. All three are down about 5 to 6% at the moment. Intel shares are down 9% after the chip maker's latest earnings report. New CEO Lip Bhutan said he'll cancel some factory projects and be more conservative with spending from here on out. Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel reports.
The CEO said that he does not subscribe to the belief that if you build it, they will come, which has given a knock to the previous CEO's investments, calling them excessive and unwise.
Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel reporting. And shares of Tesla are higher by more than 4% on a report from Business Insider that the EV maker plans to roll out robo-taxi service in San Francisco this weekend. Max Chafkin covers Tesla for Bloomberg Business Week.
So the Business Insider report is based on a memo, an internal memo, within Tesla, promising a sort of robo-taxi service, albeit one with a driver in the driver's seat. So I'm not sure if you can really call it a robo-taxi if there is if it's a driverless car that does have a driver, but that what they're saying is that they're testing this.
Bloomberg's Max Chafkin. Meanwhile, The Information is reporting that Tesla's made only a few hundred Optimus robots so far. The company's aiming to build 5,000 by the end of this year. Meta Platforms says it will stop selling political ads in the European Union, citing new rules on transparency and targeting of issue ads that are set to take effect in October. Meta says the regulations create an untenable level of complexity and legal uncertainty. Right now, Meta shares are little changed to the upside. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg.
Hi.
Kind of okay. And all of the accidents that played out earlier this year, and now you're starting to see the travel side start to go the other way, in which case you're going to start to see tariffs hit the data as well as the travel stuff, and then you're going to start to see inflation pick up. At the same time, if we see the unemployment rate remain roughly where it is, 4.1, 4.2, it's going to be a tough environment for the Fed to be cutting in September.
You know, you look at the market, and at least on the equity side, you see a lot of exuberance. Crypto stocks just taking off. You see SPACs listing Bitcoin treasury companies. I guess, why do you think that a rate cut here, David, won't set off more animal spirits in a way that starts to set this market into a place that's not healthy?
Yeah, it's a very fair concern. I think the economy actually is not that sensitive to the short-term interest rate. What we saw in the last decade really was an economy that became less sensitive through terming out of debt, through the long tail of QE. And what we're seeing now is that the interest rate is really impacting certain segments of the economy, auto loans, the real estate market. Parts of that market are looking on the weaker side. So I think it's really more about taking out a bit of an insurance policy. I actually think the Fed could cut next week. It's not been telegraphed. If I were the Fed, I would cut a quarter point next week. I would wait and see how inflation evolves over the next few months. If it turns out that inflation's reasonably subdued, they can keep going. If it turns out that that we see a bigger tariff shock from inflation, they can stop. And the market is pricing almost 50 basis points of cuts this year. If they went next week and stopped, that would still be a hawkish outcome relative to the market.
We will get back to that. But, setting up for next week, the big Fed meeting, Stephanie, how are you setting expectations for clients right now?
I don't think it will be that eventful of a meeting. I think Powell's just going to continue to reiterate we're watching the data. Certainly, whether or not they should be cutting in July, I certainly don't think they will be. Governor Waller is one of the few that are really outspoken about that. So realistically, we'll see a meeting where it's very much wait and see. It's very, very data dependent, and then it'll be setting up for optionality for September. So they're going to certainly leave the door open, keep the market, pricing in the way it is. There's no reason for them to deliver a hawkish outcome this week. So my expectation is they're going to come in and just say we're watching the data. We'll see inflation as it evolves. We're keeping an eye on the labor market.
I'm going to follow with you on this because there's a view out there that if you do see the Fed start cutting earlier, or if you see folks like Waller start to dissent, right, that this is to appease the president at this point in time. With the Fed's credibility under question in a lot of ways right now, with the president putting so much pressure on the Fed, how do you view that issue of central bank independence?
Yeah, central bank independence is critical. So to the extent that he would, succumb to any of the pressure, certainly don't expect that will be the case. If anything, maybe you could argue the opposite. They have to preserve that independence such that maybe they'd be hawkish on the margin. That said, I think they're going to do what they think is right, and Powell has proven to be very, very much data dependent, independent from all of this rhetoric, and he's going to do what he thinks is right. And if the September meeting, if the data line up for them to be able to cut, call the unemployment rate rising towards 4.5%, then sure, they're absolutely going to do it. But if we're sitting here heading into the September meeting, and core inflation picks up to about 3% annualized over the summer, and the unemployment rate is sitting around 4.2, even 4.3, I think it's going to be a tougher argument for the Fed to be cutting.
Okay, so what does this mean in terms of how you're trading this, David? Because if you have so many people betting on steepeners, you have seen a material steepening already. Would you go further into that trade?
I think, there's an overarching theme here, which is, I think, fixed income today, actively managed, multi-sector, flexible approach, we think is a sweet spot for investors today. You can get a 6 to a 6.5% yield in an actively managed fund, and you compare that to the cash rate at around 4.25%. It's a decent yield pickup. You don't have to go down in credit quality that much. When we look at this year so far, most of our active bond products are returning between 4 and 5%, compared with cash at around 2%. And so, the other thing we're seeing too with bonds today is that they're starting to diversify a bit more in a portfolio. As inflation has come down, we've seen that correlation reverse. And so when we look at the correlation of treasury rates to stocks or treasury rates to corporate credit spreads, we're actually seeing an improvement in the diversification element of bonds. So we're really advocating people to look at an actively managed approach and really harvest that yield. One other thing I'd say is we're seeing traditional approaches get disrupted by the fact that bond benchmarks and indices have become much more concentrated. With the fiscal issuance out there, we see treasury weights and indices going to 50%. So we think you need to take a different approach.
So actively managed funds, I've spoken to your colleague Rick Reeder about this as well. The weighting of mortgages in the portfolios you guys are running right now. What is it thinking here? Is it consistent with the idea that the long end will stay high and therefore mortgages might still be a place to be headed towards, given you think the long end is coming down?
Actually, on our yield curve exposure, we have preferred the kind of 2 to 5 year part of the curve relative to the long end. I do think that you're going to see more term premium as a result of both the fiscal issuance and the more price-sensitive demand base for fixed income today. But we do like mortgages. I think it's one of the few sectors and spread sectors in fixed income where valuations are not in kind of the lower quartile. So you have actually pretty reasonable valuations in mortgages, and we do think interest rate volatility will stay relatively subdued. And so you're getting paid 150 basis point nominal spread in mortgage basis. That's actually a pretty attractive investment opportunity.
This all goes down to the big issue here of the short end versus the long end, with a lot of investors feeling like that long end is really what's more material to the economy. How do you see that issue playing out, Stephanie? Do you think that that long end staying higher, now around 4.4% on the 10-year, what does that mean in terms of the ripple effects?
Yeah, so I think we're going to be stuck stuck in this range-bound territory from 4.4 to 4.6 for a lot of the year. So I'd be adding duration to portfolios if we get to 4.6. I think we're going to kind of bounce around for a while. From an economic perspective, of course, it still has been putting some headwinds on the housing market. I think the other thing that has held back housing activity in the first half has not just been rates. I think it's also been the concern around the economic backdrop. If you think a recession is coming, why are you going to buy a house now? You're going to wait for lower prices and lower mortgage rates in the future. I think now once people realize that recession is probably not coming, they're going to start adding back to housing activity, in which case that headwind is kind of going to subside too, in which case interest rate is a lot less sensitive for the economy than sort of many folks expected.
I've just been being drained from my 6% mortgage, and I'm waiting for that moment to refinance. Stephanie Roth, chief economist at Wolfe Research, and David Rogel, lead portfolio manager of BlackRock's Total Return Fund. And up next, the auction block. U.S. high-yield volumes stay red hot. July is topping $27 billion, having its best month since 2021. We're going to talk about credit next. This is Real Yield on Bloomberg.
Jumpstart your trading day on Bloomberg Open Interest.
2 hours of single stock stories that are driving the opening bell action.
We'll take you to Wall Street, Main Street, the C-suite, and beyond.
These are companies that are growing their market.
The great companies in the U.S. are the companies hitting the cutting edge. That's a different story.
Get the inside track on what's buzzing in markets
with the players who are shaping the narrative.
If you have bad earnings reports, you're going to get punished.
They're not buying what the industry is selling. Join us on Bloomberg Open Interest every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
AI should be for everybody, from leaders to the working on floor. And we can save 90% of time, 50% of workforce. AI is core in centers of change. And therefore, we invest heavily to AI. Actually, we started more than 10 years ago because we think the machine in the past helped our hand and legs. Now the machine helps us in brain.
Are you betting all your money in this right now?
When the OpenAI appear, immediately I ask whole corporations study how will you bring generative AI to the job.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Francine Lacqua in Sintra, Portugal, and this is Bloomberg.
I'm Shonali Basak, and this is Bloomberg Real Yield. It's time now for the auction block, where we saw some hot and cool areas in credit issuance this week, starting with U.S. high grade. Volumes coming in at the low end of forecasts, all around $23 billion. And you saw names like Amex, Pepsi, Bank of America leading the way for sales. You saw a similar cool down in Europe, where it was the slowest week for this year in the primary market. And in U.S. high yield, I told you before the break that this was the hottest July for sales since 2021. CoreWeave helped drive that volume this week. It sold $1.75 billion, which will be used in part to refinance debt. The new debt offering is CoreWeave's first since May. And leverage loans are red hot. Weekly volume of around $85 billion, making it the second busiest week of all time. And you can see in this chart, Monday was the second busiest day on record. Borrowers continue to lower costs by repricing existing loans. Speaking of credit, Alex Petrone from Rockefeller Asset Management still sees opportunities.
Think of some of the events that we've seen when spreads are at all-time tights as they are today, and it very much is technically driven factors, tremendous demand, limited supply. But when you see spreads at all-time tights, you're almost looking for a reason to say, well, spreads should widen out from here. And in those environments, you take a step back and you say, is this a buy opportunity? Candidly.
And now we bring in Leslie Falconio. She's head of taxable fixed income strategy at UBS Global Wealth Management, and Lotfi Karui. He is chief credit strategist at Goldman Sachs. Leslie, you look at this market right now. How do you feel about the debt that's coming to market, the new supply? Are you comfortable with the additional risk that is being taken on?
Well, I mean, look, there's no question. As the segment showed, there is a technical bid out there. And I think that given the fact that the equity market is making these new highs, the corporate balance sheets are still strong, and there's a lot of catch-up, too, from what we saw in the April shutdown, where I think institutional investors were underweight their bogeys. People kind of took a step back in terms of being overly defensive. You know, I'm not surprised the supply is coming out. I'm not surprised there's a bid for the supply. But when we think about where risk assets are right now, at least in our opinion, we're neutral high yield here. We're neutral leverage loans here. And I do think the risk going forward is that as the equity market makes these new highs and as credit spreads are so tight, the correlations have a tendency to rise. So if, in fact, we do get an environment where, say, the Fed doesn't cut or inflation stays higher for longer, then you're going to have a situation where the equity market falls, treasury yields go up, and credit spreads widen. Similar to what we saw in 2022, but not the same magnitude. So while credit spreads are tight, we're not looking for a large amount of widening, but we really do like the better in terms of up in quality here.
Lotfi, let's talk about risk right now. Let's talk about that push-pull between the high-yield bond area and the leverage loan space. What do you like better and why?
Between bonds and loans, I would say I like bonds better than loans, and we've been neutral for the last, call it month to month and a half. But the main reason, and I always viewed this through the lens of that trade-off between carry and duration, but you talked about that in the previous segment, but the path of least resistance seems to be for a steeper curve. It doesn't matter how exactly we get there, whether we get there because the Fed is in a position of strength to deliver normalization cuts, or whether we get there because the Fed is forced to respond to recession risk. The fact is that the curve will, very much likely steepen from here. So you lose a little bit of carry on the leveraged loan side. And then we're comfortable taking duration risk on the bond side. I think there is some kind of a new equilibrium for intermediate long-dated yields. It's a lot more range-bound relative to what we saw last year. So vol has declined, there. It's really a valuation call more than anything else.
Leslie, to speak to what Lotfi was talking about here, that bias towards a steeper curve, in that scenario, who loses?
That's a great question. I mean, we've been calling for a steeper curve since the second half of 2024 after 2 years of inversion. Listen, the steepness of the curve is a consensus trade now, right? It's very much a consensus allocation. Everyone's expecting that term premium to remain high in the back end. You might not see that kind of velocity in terms of the delta and, changing in terms of that term premium, but it's going to remain high. I do think that right now, in terms of the steepness of the yield curve, because it is more of that consensus, really the risk is that the curve flattens. Right. And I think that flattens if, in fact, we do see this slower growth than what we're expecting in the second half of the year. If a lot of this sort of rhetoric in terms of, tariffs being a headwind to growth actually play out. So the risk is of the curve flattener because the steepener is definitely a consensus allocation right now.
Lotfi, when you look at the leveraged loan world right now, one thing that a lot of investors have been looking out for is that return of M&A, particularly private equity-driven M&A. Now, we know that that's a space that's been very highly levered and has added more debt on top of debt, probably on top of debt again. So as they come to market, are investors going to get comfortable with the deals that are being done?
Well, you're right. I mean, the share of M&A in the primary market is the highest it's been in probably 3 years now. And so there's definitely been a pickup. But if you look at other sources of use of proceeds, other forms, basically companies are deploying the debt, I would say this is still pretty much a market that is centered around refinancing. And so, yes, M&A volumes are up, but in aggregate, it doesn't seem to me that that's sort of causing a deterioration in credit fundamentals. It's not coming with a significant increase in leverage. I would get concerned if we see evidence actually that fundamentals are deteriorating. And so to me, it speaks to improved sentiment in boardrooms. I think there's certainly growing comfort that we've put most of the headwinds on the tariffs front behind us here. And as a result of that, I think you've seen that pick up in M&A, but it's not a source of concern from a fundamental standpoint.
Lotfi, a lot of questions around the call you made around ending your overweight to bank bonds right now. And of course, that matters for the banking system. They're looking for the lowest cost of capital. What's behind that recommendation?
It's not a negative view on fundamentals. It's a view on valuations. You know, we had been overweight the banking system pretty much actually since the aftermath of the regional banking crisis in 2023. That trade has had a great run to the point where big money center banks are actually now trading well inside the IG index. We don't see value. Now, we're cognizant of the fact that there's a tailwind from deregulation, but I think that tailwind will benefit a lot more the equity market than credit markets. It's really about valuation as opposed to any concern over the fundamental outlook.
Guys, we got to leave it there. We're running out of time. Always wish we had more. That is Leslie Falconio with UBS Global Wealth Management and Lutfi Karui with Goldman Sachs. And if you can't get enough on credit like me, please check out the Bloomberg Credit Edge weekly podcast on the terminal and wherever you get your podcasts. And still ahead, the final spread, the week ahead, we get earnings, the Fed decision, and a Trump tariff deadline August 1st coming in hot and heavy. This is Real Yield on Bloomberg.
Progress never stops, neither should you. At PwC, we make sure you're ready for what's next, with the expertise and technology you need to outthink and outperform. We're with you, sleeves rolled up, start to finish, so you can stay ahead, so you can protect what you built, so you can create new value. We build for what's next, so you can get there now. PwC, so you can.
In France, when we do something, it often ends up iconic. This radio antenna, for example, iconic. Or a gift to a friend, iconic. A little something for breakfast, iconic. When we aim high, when we go deep. When we make hearts beat faster, and when we make them beat again. When we search for something, and when we find it. When we triumph. Even when we stumble. Iconic. When we get people moving. When we get the world moving. Iconic. Why? Because we do things our way. Stylish, bold, exploring, innovating, carrying our history and values into the future. Make it iconic. Choose France.
Headquarters in New York, I'm Danny Berger. Welcome to Bloomberg Brief. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
I'm Shonali Bassick, and this is Bloomberg Real Yield. It's time now for the final spread, the week ahead. Coming up Monday, President Trump looks to meet with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to discuss trade. Plus, Secretary Bessent meets with China. All eyes on that. And Tuesday, U.S. consumer confidence, and also will be at the height of earnings season with names like Barclays, Boeing, Starbucks, and Visa. Wednesday is Fed Day, plus Mag 7 earnings. Just an exhausting middle of the week. Microsoft and Meta after the close that day. And Thursday, more tech earnings. Amazon, Apple, Samsung, plus U.S. PCE and a BOJ rate decision. Friday, August 1st is that Trump tariff deadline. Also Chevron and Exxon earnings. And for my final thought, labor and inflation data next week, because of course you're not going to just watch for the way the Fed is moving into the dot plot. You're going to be watching the PCE, with core PCE expected to come in at 0.3%, with the prior reading being 0.2% month over month. Year over year, it's expected to remain flat at 2.7%. And non-farm payrolls we're watching to come in at 110K. We'll keep an eye on it. But from New York, that does it from us. Same time, same place next week. This was Bloomberg Real Yield, and this is Bloomberg.
In France, when we do something, it often ends up iconic. This radio antenna, for example, iconic. Or a gift to a friend, iconic. A little something for breakfast, iconic. When we aim high, when we go deep. When we make hearts beat faster, and when we make them beat again. when we search for something and when we find it, when we triumph, even when we stumble. Iconic. When we get people moving, when we get the world moving. Iconic. Why? Because we do things our way. Stylish, bold, exploring, innovating, carrying our history and values into the future. Make it iconic. Choose France.
Progress never stops, neither should you. At PwC, we make sure you're ready for what's next, with the expertise and technology you need to outthink and outperform. We're with you, sleeves rolled up, start to finish, so you can stay ahead, so you can protect what you built, so you can create new value. We build for what's next, so you can get there now. PwC, so you can.
Fewer than 1,000. And decades later, there are close to 2,000 pandas in the wild now. Actually, I think a little over 1,800. There are over 700 pandas in breeding centers. So as part of this program, we have tripled the number of pandas on the planet.
But still a small number of pandas.
Because of this program, there are more pandas on the planet, more quality panda habitat in the wild, and pandas have gone from being endangered to being vulnerable.
Bloomberg launches our inaugural 25 African Startups to Watch list.
About 2.5 years ago, we created a solution. We are able to generate refrigeration using the sun and water. We're able to store energy in the form of ice, as opposed to storing energy in the form of lithium batteries. We integrated in every refrigerator a pay-as-you-go technology, allowing individuals and small businesses to be able to pay as low as $10 to own a refrigerator.
Uncover is a women's wellness brand that is specifically made for women of color. It's based in Africa, which is the most underserved beauty market in the world. We are making Africa a priority and not an afterthought. We believe that the population on this continent deserves to be formulated for, heard, and we are giving this consumer a voice.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. I'm Shonali Bassick. Let's get a check on these markets because we have screen on the screen still for the day. We are near session highs, up almost 0.4% on the S&P 500. Volatility nice and low. We're looking at a VIX at a 15 handle, and it makes for good news for that IPO market that's starting to come back. The 10-year yield now below 4.4%, but only a little bit. It's at 4.39. But of course, we've been watching the bond market very closely, particularly at the long end, and the U.S. dollar getting a lift this afternoon, 0.4% higher. Now, President Trump is on his way to Scotland with several major trade deals unresolved, just days ahead of his self-imposed August 1st deadline. That includes an agreement with both the UK and the EU. And the president is set to discuss trade with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer during the visit. And just this hour, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that she and President Trump have agreed to meet in Scotland on Sunday to discuss transatlantic trade relations and how they can keep them strong. Here is the president this morning on where things currently stand.
I would say that we have a 50-50 chance, maybe less than that, but a 50-50 chance of making a deal with the EU. And it'll be a deal where they have to buy down their tariffs, because they're right now at 30%. And they'll have to buy them down, maybe, or they could leave them the way they are. But they want to make a deal very badly. I would have said we have a 25% chance with Japan, and they kept coming back, and we made a deal.
And here with the latest, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is live in Washington. Tyler, walk through what to expect, particularly with the EU, because as we all know, the relationship has not always been so rosy.
Right, exactly, Shonali. And it was interesting to hear President Trump say 50-50. That probably isn't likely a good news for the European Union, considering, as he did outline, they are facing that 30% tariff rate if they are unable to reach a framework agreement by August 1st. But at the same time, our own reporting has indicated that there has been progress when it does come to these talks, and that EU negotiators would be prepared to accept a 15% baseline tariff rate in the hopes that they could also bring down the tariff rates when it comes to those sector-specific tariffs, notably on autos and steel. Our reporting also indicates that there's already been talks about some potential industry exemptions, including when it comes to aviation, also some generic medicines, and perhaps some industrial goods as well. So those are some of the themes that we're watching for here, as Bloomberg had confirmed, and you read it there just moments ago, that the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will be meeting with President Trump during his visit to Scotland over the weekend. The thing that really complicates these negotiations in particular, one, that the EU is negotiating as a 27-member nation bloc, but the second is that this goes way beyond tariffs. As you well know, the administration is looking for a broad array of things in order to announce a framework. They want broader market access when it comes to U.S. ag and industrial products. They're also not too happy when it comes to their tax systems, like the VAT or digital services taxes, things like that that can really complicate negotiations. But something that is emerging perhaps as a theme here is that we keep hearing the administration talk about this idea of innovative solutions. You heard the president point to Japan and how they put forward this $550 billion investment fund that ultimately helped get that deal over the finish line. Shonali, I had the chance to catch up with Peter Navarro, the White House's senior trade counselor, earlier this week on Balance of Power. And when I asked him about the potential for an EU deal, he said that this administration is looking for something unique, in his words. And at this point, it's really our best guess what ultimately that could be to ultimately push that deal over the finish line.
When you're looking at August 1st, Tyler, and the deals that have not been done yet, where is the most concern about deals that are too far on the horizon to meet that mark?
Well, it's been really interesting to see how some of the countries that were originally prioritized for the talks, those economies in Asia that are geographically close to China, such as South Korea, there also was a really big emphasis on India as well. And we haven't really seen much progress or news when it comes to that, though we do know that there's some pretty high stakes negotiations when it comes to South Korea in Washington today. And that is also where this conversation about those sector specific tariffs really do come in, because we know that both of those trading partners are looking for some key exemptions or at least lower rates when it comes to autos. That has been a really big theme throughout all of these negotiations. It's also probably worth pointing out, of course, as you well know, once these deals are announced, these really are frameworks, and it takes time to go back and forth and get those actual negotiations done. And look at the United Kingdom as one example. We know that President Trump is going to be meeting with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer over the weekend. And while the main contours of that deal have been implemented, that lower 10% baseline, more U.S. ag products being imported into the United Kingdom. Again, one of the big sticking points still remaining is when it comes to those steel tariffs. And I think that's going to be a theme that we continue to watch and play out in the months ahead, that particularly on sector-specific tariffs, it's taking a longer time to negotiate.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in Washington. We thank you so very much. We're looking forward to your coverage heading into next week, of course, to meet that August 1st deadline. For more on the global trade scramble, let's bring in Ishwar Prasad. He is the Tolani Senior Professor of Trade Policy at Cornell University and Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. He's also the former head of the IMF's China division. So let's talk about the world a little bit. If you think about the trade deals that have been struck or at least negotiated so far, how much is Japan a template from your view?
At one level, certainly the Japanese trade deal announcement is going to serve as a template in the sense that Trump declares victory, claiming that the U.S. has received a lot of goodies from the other side. But then as the details start becoming a little clearer, it becomes obvious that there isn't complete agreement between the two sides on what exactly has been agreed to. And also it turns out that some of these numbers might be a little inflated. If you think about the $550 billion that has been mentioned by Trump, it's really in the form of guarantees provided perhaps by the Japanese government or Japanese private sector, not actual investments. We don't know what form those investments are going to take, what sectors, and certainly when it comes to issues like the profit distribution, there seems to be a wide gulf between what the Trump administration says it has accomplished and what the Japanese side seems to be saying. So as your colleague said, we are getting a bunch of frameworks at this stage, but one of the key issues that I think markets were looking to, which is the resolution of the uncertainty in these trade relationships, I don't think we're quite there yet, because there seems to be so much uncertainty about exactly what the terms are going to be, and a lot of contentiousness still to come in each of these deals.
One question I have is around the tariffs as they apply to Japan in particular. There is an understanding that that 15% rate doesn't apply equally to all types of goods. And so when you think about the breakdown of how these tariffs would play out, if some goods are more material than others to import to the United States and are facing a higher tariff, then